Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to those watching online and welcome to everyone who's joined us here in the room. My name is Akash Paun. I am a Senior Fellow at the Institute for Government in London, and I'm delighted to be here sharing today's event on devolution, levelling up and local leadership, about which I'll be in conversation with Tracy Brabin, Mayor of West Yorkshire. And Tracy, thanks so much for joining us. Just to say, as a graduate of the University of Leeds, it's a particular pleasure to be up in Leeds doing this event live on location, so to speak. We are, for those watching online, recording this from the Tetley, which is now a contemporary art gallery, but it's based on the site of the historic Tetley's Brewery. So I think it's the ideal location actually for a conversation about the economic future of Leeds and how the Leeds and the wider West Yorkshire region are changing. So really looking forward to our conversation. Before we kick off the event proper, so to speak, I'm very pleased to give the floor to Bronwyn Maddox, Director of the Institute for Government. Bronwyn.
Hello everyone, a very warm welcome. I'm not going to take up very much time, but just to say that we're delighted to be hosting this event. I'm really looking forward to this discussion with Tracy Brabin and with you all, and I hope questions are coming in online as well. This is part of our Levelling Up program, as Akash has been saying, and it's something that we've been giving more and more time to at the Institute, looking as well at devolution within England, not just the different nations of the United Kingdom. And I'm really glad to see the energy going into this discussion right across the UK. We're delighted to take your questions now or afterwards. Even many people send them afterwards. But thank you very much indeed for joining us. And I want to thank as well Manchester Airports Group for helping us with this particular event, and JRSST, Charitable Trust, part of the Joseph Rowntree Trust Group, for working with us generally on this series about local leadership. With that, I'm going to hand back to Akash Paun and Tracy Brabin.
Thank you, Bronwyn. So yes, as Bronwyn just mentioned, we're really grateful to Manchester Airports Group for their sponsorship of this event, and I'm pleased that Andy Clark, who is the Head of Public Affairs at Manchester Airport, is here to say a few words about the company's interest and reasons for partnering with us on this event. So, Andy.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see so many people. It's great to be at the Tetley. I think some of you are probably asking the question, why on earth are Manchester Airports Group sponsoring an event in Leeds? And hopefully I can articulate that over the next couple of minutes. So Manchester Airport pre-pandemic served 30 million passengers, 210 destinations, millions of people within a 2-hour drive of the airport. So it's clear for us that we are the global gateway for the north of England. We draw people in from Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, different regions around the north. And we believe passionately that what is good for Manchester Airport is good for the whole of the north of England. When we're able to work together, we think we can benefit the whole of the northern economy. We have been working very closely with other airports throughout the pandemic, so I want to make it clear that where Manchester Airport succeeds, that's not to the disadvantage of Leeds Bradford or Liverpool or Teesside or any other airport in the north. We serve different markets. We believe we can all exist together. We think airports are a key part of levelling up. We were disappointed that in the Levelling Up white paper there was no mention of international connectivity, something we're looking at as an organisation. Be really interested to hear from Tracy today on some of the issues that we're focusing on around HS2, improving transport links, decarbonisation, which is an existential issue for the aviation industry. We have our own plan of how we want to tackle that, and we want to reach net zero at our airports by 2038. We think we're well on our way to achieving that, and we'll be really interested to hear from Tracy on her part of that agenda. I also wanted to touch on some of the benefits that we think international connectivity ultimately brings to places like Leeds. So we have flights to the US, we previously had flights to India, China, and we know that our flights from China would bring in students who came and studied here in Leeds or around the north of England, and with them would bring millions of pounds in spending power. So that's why we really do believe, and we want everyone else to start thinking on the same page of what is good for Manchester is good for the north of England. I realise I'm asking people to sort of get over centuries-old rivalries between the two sides of the pandemic. As someone who lives in Leeds but works in Manchester, I'm trying to do that myself, but would love to hear from Tracy about how she sees that working in practice. I think really we've got to, unashamedly promote that story of people who might fly in from China or the US, arrive in Manchester, drive or get the train over to Yorkshire, enjoy everything Yorkshire has to offer. Dare say it, maybe even they'll pop to Liverpool as well. Sorry, Tracy. But yeah, really looking forward to the event and looking forward to a good discussion. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Andy. And yeah, thanks again for your support of the event. Okay, so we now have, how long? A little bit under an hour for the main part of the event. So let me introduce our guest main speaker properly. So Tracy Brabin, as people will be aware, is the directly elected Metro Mayor of the West Yorkshire region, meaning that she chairs the Combined Authority, which is formed of 5 individual local councils in the region: Leeds, Bradford, Kirklees, Wakefield, and I knew as soon as I was starting this I was going to forget one of them, and the 5th one. Apologies.
I'm going to let you squirm.
I shouldn't have started the list. And Tracy also holds the powers of Police and Crime Commissioner, which is quite unusual. Only one of the other Metro mayors, Andy Burnham, also has that function. And the PCC role was merged into the mayoral role when it was created just last year. Tracy is also the first woman to hold the post of Metro Mayor anywhere in the country, and prior to May 2021 was MP for Batley and Spen. Before that, had a long career in television and on the stage as well, I think. So I've got a set of questions that I'm going to discuss with the Mayor first of all, around the broad theme, as mentioned, of levelling up, devolution, local leadership, and then very keen to bring in as many people as possible from both the online and live audience. So if you're watching online, there should be a function on your screen that allows you to submit questions, and I can see some are already popping up on my clever iPad, so I'll be keeping an eye on those. And obviously people in the room do formulate your own questions as well. Okay, I think that's all that I have to say by way of introduction. So let's get into the conversation. I mean, first of all, you've been sitting there listening to others speak, but thanks very much for joining us. Great pleasure to have you with us.
It's a pleasure, and great to see so many people as well in such a beautiful building. It's great to be here.
Yeah, really nice location for it. Okay, so this week marks 2 years exactly, I think, since the West Yorkshire devolution deal was concluded. And as mentioned, that was an agreement between, well, then there was the 5 local leaders of the councils. I think at least one of them is in the room today, between the local leaders and central government. Other places like Greater Manchester, West Midlands, Liverpool City region had reached that point several years earlier and sort of started down the devolution path back in 2017. Why did it take so long to reach that point here in West Yorkshire?
I think the challenge was about the area, and there was a real lobby for one Yorkshire. I mean, the brand of Yorkshire is so fantastic. Who wouldn't want one Yorkshire? But I think couldn't get that over the line. Then there was tensions between some councils in South Yorkshire, whether they felt that would they be included if it was Leeds City region. There was an awful lot of back and forth. And in fact, when I was a Member of Parliament, I was a part of a debate in the chamber and saying, why can't everybody get on with it? And the Tories just said, well, it's all your fault. So that's why. But we did get it over the line, and it was quite a great coincidence, actually, that last Saturday, where the Nexus building was where the Devo deal was signed 2 years ago, to the day that we had our first ever International Women's Day conference. So I did feel that that was quite a sweet circle. Obviously, the deal being signed was 2 years ago, but I was elected only 10 months ago, and it's been my first year, May the 9th. But I think we are now actually motoring on devolution in the north, in West Yorkshire. So we've some catching up to do.
Yeah.
But we're over the line, and we did get a really good deal. So I would like to thank all the leaders of West Yorkshire councils for the determination they showed to get that deal. The gain share, which is the money you get from devolution for the mayor to spend, or the mayor and partners to spend for our region, 38 million a year for 10 years is quite substantial. So they did a great job. And like you say, the responsibilities for police and crime, it is a unique opportunity that I'm really excited about, being able to take a public health approach to what we do. And there's only Andy Burnham with those, as you say, those responsibilities. Yeah. I would say if you didn't have them and you were the mayor, you would definitely want them, because it does give you a unique view of your region. For example, looking at my police and crime plan, one of the big themes is safety of women and girls. That can filter through everything we do. So that can be in housing, that can be in transport, that can be skills training. So there's a real Venn diagram that gives us lots of creativity to solve our problems. And so thank you. There's only James Lewis in the room, but thank you, James, for all that you did and the other leaders to get that great deal.
Yeah, as you say, it's you do have that broader suite of functions that enables that joining up potentially. So yeah, that's a really useful place to start. So I guess, I mean, the next thing I want to ask is, you know, as you say, it's still early days. You're only 10 months in. It's not a well-established model or level of government in this country in general, the metro mayors, the combined authorities, and so on. And I think there's some people who might question, why is it that we need another tier of government? We have local councils and central government. What is it that you think are the strongest arguments for why devolution and devolution to this particular scale is the best way to improve the economic and social prospects of the region?
Well, we know our region, we know what our challenges are, and we know how to solve them. So I think, and that disconnect between our region and Whitehall and Westminster, making decisions on buses, for example, in Westminster, they don't know how they impact on the lives of the people in West Yorkshire. So to have that voice and that advocacy is really helpful. But I would say that I was in a really good position in that the Combined Authority had already been set up. So there were structures in place and people in post to help us through that transition. It wasn't like Dan Jarvis in South Yorkshire, who had to set up from a standing start. So we were in a really strong position. I'm also standing on the shoulders of other giants in the region. You know, we're learning from each other. I'm part of the M10 group of mayors, the M8 Labour mayors. So, you know, our ambitions here, I really do feel that we can act swiftly because of experiences elsewhere. For example, when it comes to the buses, I've said, and I stood on a manifesto about making buses better. We know anybody that uses the buses in West Yorkshire will know that the system is pretty broken. And you'll have seen that Andy Burnham has gone to public control only this week. Yes. But we have invested £1 million in looking at public control and franchising, whilst also entering into an enhanced partnership with the bus companies. So I'm learning from other mayors around the regions as well. So I think in answer to your question, though, more directly, we need a Yorkshire voice, talking to government about what we need. And we'll get to levelling up in a wee while, but making decisions in central government that impact on our lives is not the way to make lives better. We need to bring power closer to the people it affects, and that's why I think devolution is so important. And I'm really pleased, actually, in the Levelling Up white paper, that it does feel, the government, on the one hand, say they want more devolution, which is good, but then they're still, unfortunately, not necessarily giving us the powers that we need to enact it.
Yeah, well, we'll certainly come on to where the process might go next. I mean, I was going to actually ask you about this a bit later on, but since you've mentioned it already, would you actually have preferred a Yorkshire-wide, well, one Yorkshire deal as it was called for a while, but yeah, a Yorkshire-wide devolution arrangement of some kind? You know, there's obviously different party to your own, but there's the Yorkshire Party. I know that the campaign's still for something like that, a Yorkshire Parliament maybe, and First Minister treating the county as more like a nation and having something more like Scottish and Welsh devolution. The government obviously ruled that out and went for something that was much more based on city region, functional economic geography, as they would put it. So yeah, what's your view on that kind of decision?
Well, I campaigned for One Yorkshire.
Yeah.
I thought the brand was really powerful. We have a lot of commonalities. Obviously, it was too big, a bit too too much of a challenge potentially for government. But we are not a country. We're not Wales, we're not Scotland. But to see the work that's been done with Labour in power in Scotland and devolution at its purest, we've loads of great lessons that we can learn from that. But we are where we are, and I think we're using the powers we have. We're challenging government where we think we could do with further powers, but we're getting on with the job to deliver for the people of West Yorkshire. We've £830 million came out of the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement. We've got that to spend, we've got planning to do, mass transit, we've loads of work to get on with for West Yorkshire. But of course, North Yorkshire now is looking at devolution. So it is going to, I think, happen. And whether then those different regions come together, well, that's for the future. But I did campaign for One Yorkshire, but, I'm so excited that we've got devolution here in West Yorkshire.
Yeah.
And I do work very closely with Dan. So, East and West, West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire, we do work very closely together because lots of our workforce, that border is really porous. We've loads to celebrate between us, and I think it has been really fruitful working with Dan, to work with commonalities of scale and so on.
Yeah. Who's returning to Westminster?
He
of
is,
course,
and I'm
isn't he?
really
Yeah.
sad about that because we were getting on very well, and he really was delivering for South Yorkshire. But I'm sure whoever, I have to be cautious, whoever wins, and obviously I hope it's Ollie, that I'm sure they'll continue that great work.
Ollie, who's also a Leeds University graduate, who
Is it?
I believe did the same course as I did, maybe a year or two after, I think. Okay, terrific. So yeah, we might come back actually to the negotiations in other parts of the country as part of levelling up. But I want to move on to some of the specific things you're focused on here in West Yorkshire. And you've mentioned transport already, which is, of course, a central priority, perhaps the biggest priority. And obviously, Andy from Manchester Airports Group was talking about connectivity as well. So just by way of context, I hope people in the room can see the slide as well as people at home, but here's the budget, the planned expenditure for the current year of the Combined Authority here. And just a simple point that I wanted to use it to illustrate, transport is the biggest by a long way chunk of your spending. Total budget or total expenditure is, I think, is like 570 million for the year, of which around 2/3 is transport, either infrastructure or actually services. After that, adult skills, business support and housing infrastructure are the kind of next biggest chunks. But yeah, 2/3 or so is transport. So that's obviously going to dominate a lot of your time. And I know also, just to come on to the next slide, that you've been critical of particularly the decision by the government not to proceed with the HS2 link to Leeds. And generally, I think you've made the argument, as have others, that this part of the country is underfunded in terms of its transport system. So again, colleagues might have looked at the numbers, crunched the numbers, would suggest that that's absolutely correct. Yorkshire and the Humber, that's the scale at which the data's collected, per person get far less funding than London at the other extreme, but also less than other parts of the north. So yeah, that historically has been the problem. However, to come on to my question, as you say, the government has agreed to quite a big, was it 800 million or so transport settlement, including, I think, to fund a mass transit system for the Leeds City region potentially.
Well, not to fund the mass transit system.
Or
I mean, it's £2 billion to fund it.
Right, okay, so
yeah.
some stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that brings on to my question, really. I mean, you said yourself that was quite a welcome settlement that the government had committed to, I guess, last autumn. Does that, to you, suggest that the government accepts that there's a problem and is now going to redress that balance? And it very much links to levelling up as well. Transport connectivity is one of the 12 missions, and making sure places have an equally good transport system. So yeah, what's your overall view about how the government's going about this?
Well, look, we have to see it in context, don't we, that we as a region have been desperately underfunded for decades. We are still on a Victorian infrastructure. We have been campaigning for the electrification of the Transpennine route for 10 years. The IRP that we waited for months for, which you will know that was much lauded as, a seismic funding for the whole of the north.
Is the integrated rail plan.
Yeah. And of the 7 billion that we were given, of the 90 plus billion, 6 of that was already allocated for Transpennine. So basically we got £1 billion out of that, and they were for a sequence of surveys and electrification between Leeds and Bradford. So hugely disappointing. Now, it's not just about connectivity between Manchester and Leeds. It is also about social mobility and levelling up, that Bradford has lobbied hard for a stop on a new line between Manchester and Leeds that was going to be the Northern Powerhouse Rail that the Prime Minister spoke about in public in front of Stephenson's Rocket. He said, we're going to give the North, or I gave them Crossrail in the South, we're going to have this new railway line, east to west, and we were hoping that we'd get a stop in Bradford. We got none of that. And we got a survey, HS2 was pulled, and we got a survey of how to get fast trains from Sheffield to Leeds. It's just absolutely not good enough. So the reason why we were so angry is because we've been promised so much, that it was being lauded as this is the moment that we actually reverse the decline of transport in the north. And for anybody that's used the trains recently, because of COVID, because of driver shortages, because of weather, and because of underfunding, it isn't fit, it's not fit for the 21st century. So I'm making that case that it isn't just about a few, whilst they sound like large sums of money, in context and historically, they are crumbs off the table. So it was hugely disappointing that the only new section of railway that was going to be built in West Yorkshire was from Warrington to Marsden, where it would screech to a halt in Marsden and then join the Transpennine line. So it hasn't worked for us, and certainly the millions that have been spent by government supporting and setting up Transport for the North, which was supposed to be a voice for the North that would solve the problems for government about what the plan should look like. That was disregarded. They went back to TfN and said, what's your cheapest option? And they kept saying, this is suboptimal, this is not going to work, it's not going to deliver what we want, and government went for that. So I would say quite right to be angry. I am the voice of the passenger. I use public transport myself, and I'm continually pressing government that it can be better. But of course, that money is welcome. But that is also for mass transit, as you say, 200 million for mass transit, but also for bus priority lanes, for potholes. It's a whole host of other expected outcomes out of that money.
Yeah.
Across the regions, of course, the partners from local authorities have their own challenges, and they'll be, we'll be supporting their plans as well to deliver for their community.
Yeah. Transport infrastructure is certainly not cheap, and
No, it's
you're
a
quite
massive
right.
challenge.
What sounds like a big number does end up getting spread quite thin. Just to the producers at the back, this said it's going to turn off in 1 minute. I'm not sure if that is going to happen or not. We can carry on if it doesn't, if it does happen, if necessary, but hopefully it won't. And I just wondered also, Tracy, whether you had any comments on the need for better international connectivity and how far, to what extent you see that as one of your objectives for the region, just to reflect back what was said by Andy Clark earlier.
Well, Andy and I have just had a discussion before we came in, and I was very disappointed in the outcome for Leeds Bradford, and that the owners felt that it was too protracted and they couldn't wait any longer for planning permission or for the decision to be made about whether they could go ahead with their zero carbon terminal, a new building that they were going to make sure that was zero carbon. Now, I know that we as a region are committed to zero carbon by 2038, but that does not mean that we can't support companies and businesses who want to rebuild their building to make it zero carbon. There will be also added passengers, but we know that at the moment, the aviation sector, and you'll know more than anybody, is on its knees. We are still not back to pre-pandemic levels. They're saying potentially it's going to take 2 to 3 years. We can't have innovation in a sector that is on its knees. It's not going to be investing in how do we get lighter planes, how do we get greener fuel, if it's all about just, trying to stay alive and keep the lights on. So I am disappointed, because I do believe West Yorkshire can be a magnet for international investment, and those international students that come to our amazing universities. I want them to be able to use an airport that's local, rather than have to go to Manchester and then get in a car or rely on the public transport to get over here. So I am being lobbied a lot about an airport, but I really believe as a mayor, to say we don't need an airport would be slightly mad. It would be pulling up the drawbridge, I believe. So I want an airport, but I want an airport that's efficient, that's modern, that is innovative, that has got great connectivity, because at the moment you have to drive there, and that's why we were working with them to build a new station. There's lots we can do around the airport, and it's jobs, of course, let's not forget that, jobs and skills and apprenticeships. So the outcome was disappointing, but we continue. And I will be, once we can get back to meeting people across the world, we will be out there being the champion and the ambassador for our region, with some amazing companies in West Yorkshire that would really benefit from international investment, and also our exports. We can go further, so having those relationships is going to be really important. Yeah,
okay, thanks, very interesting. Okay, so you just mentioned jobs and skills and so on, and that's quite a nice segue. So I wanted to go on to talk about the broader levelling up agenda and what that means in the context of West Yorkshire, I suppose. So our screen is back, and I have a couple more slides I was just going to use to illustrate the conversation. So, I mean, the broad definition of levelling up, as the government has now expressed it, is all to do with reducing disparities in economic and public service performance, generally between the regions, and also I think between local areas within individual regions as well, which I think might be relevant in this context. But I've pulled out some relevant indicators. So first of all, jobs, you mentioned, obviously is a kind of core part of levelling up and any kind of economic strategy. And in terms of the employment rate, what this data shows, if people can see, the pink line is West Yorkshire, the blue's UK, and the orange is Greater London. In employment terms, West Yorkshire is pretty much bang on national average, and Leeds, in fact, is the grey line. The grey lines are the individual 5 authorities, is above average, so it has a higher than average employment rate. So the problem isn't that in sum total there aren't enough jobs, I suppose, in the region, but there is then variation between different places in West Yorkshire. Moving on to skills, and again, like government's very much committed to upskilling the population, and that's obviously an important mayoral function. You have control of the adult education budget through the Combined Authority. So what does the data show on skills? Well, here, clearly, West Yorkshire is below the average across the UK. Not massive, not too far behind, but again, there's that sort of intra-regional variation, and Leeds, again, we haven't marked it on the chart, but Leeds is actually above the UK average. Other parts of the region are below. So I assume that's a kind of challenge that you on the Combined Authority will be thinking about redressing. And then finally, productivity, which is a really crucial indicator, I think, for all of this. Here, the disparity with UK and Greater London, again, is a bit larger. And also what you can note there is the grey line, which is Leeds again, as the kind of wealthiest part of the region, has actually fallen behind the UK. It has grown a bit since 2010, but less quickly than the rest of the country. So I suppose my question is, given that those figures and more generally your assessment of economic conditions in the region, what to you would levelling up look like for West Yorkshire, looking ahead to, or government's talking about 2030, but even beyond that, what would success look like and how do we get there?
Well, it's interesting, there's a really great number of slides, but they end at 2019. And it would
Yes,
be interesting to see
pre-COVID,
the impact of COVID, because certainly we have seen an inward movement as well from graduates, particularly who've moved out to London, and because of COVID, they're moving back to West Yorkshire. And also our recent, I was going to say acquisitions, and that's not the phrase to use, but our recent businesses that have joined and moved to West Yorkshire, like the Bank of England, the Infrastructure Bank, and the Channel 4 and so on, and recruiting. So that potentially will affect your figures. But to just talk to your first slide, I think the issue around the jobs there, for me, what would success look like? That there are the same number of jobs, but what quality of jobs are they? What do people get paid? Now, there's 170,000 people in West Yorkshire who are working, but they're working and they're being paid under the living wage. So my job, working with government, is to make sure that there's more money in people's pocket. Now, we've got a unique storm, haven't we, ahead, because we have the cost of living crisis with national insurance rise, with energy price rises. We know petrol's going up as well. And we can see less money going into people's pockets. So that's why, for me, the Fair Work Charter was a really important piece of work, because it sets out a frame which businesses in West Yorkshire can buy into and come with us on this journey to say, these are the things you will do for your workforce, and you will always pay a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. But you will also be able to, if you work for this company, know that you will have progression, or that you'll be able to have be part of a union, that you can have flexi working. So it's really important that we make sure that when people are in work, that they get paid properly. Now, part of that solution is also skills. For me, what would levelling up actually look like is we wouldn't have the hundreds of thousands of NEETs, not in education, employment or training, that we have, and particularly in Bradford, to make sure that all of those young people don't leave school and have no future, no direction, no training. So I've been able to, as the mayor, taking responsibilities for the adult education budget, so it's a bit of a shift and lift into responsibilities, but also with the gain share, being able to say we know that skills, where the skills gap is, and we can support businesses to deliver in 16-week programs, the boot camps, the training to upskill the workforce. But it's also about your productivity chart. This is seriously important because we have amazing businesses that could be more productive. We have lower research and development than anywhere else, it seems, in the country. So we are supporting R&D and innovation and our brilliant universities and their projects. But also it's saying to businesses, you need training within your organisation to get better productivity. So skills, support for new machinery, support for exports. We need to help businesses. But fundamentally, if you wanted to sort of take a headline, it's about having a better quality of life with opportunities to enjoy time with your families and to have health and wealth, and certainly well-being is also seriously important.
And are you actually involved in any way in working out with government how levelling up and more generally, I suppose, the performance of devolved and local government is going to be measured going forward? Because that was another quite interesting aspect of the white paper, this, I think, totally correct analysis that, you know, there isn't very good quality subnational data on economic and public service performance and where the money's going and the outcomes you're getting from it. And there's this commitment to really, you know, improve that through work being done by the ONS, through some kind of new accountability body that will sit between the centre and subnational government. Is that something you have views on or been asked to contribute to?
Excuse me, we haven't been asked to contribute necessarily, but I welcome the opportunity for better figures. That would help us enormously. We've done our own State of the Region report that would be a litmus test to test me by over the next few years of what's the region like today and where the changes are. I think the idea of government is that they have a mayor's league table, which I think could be quite skewed. I think Andy Burnham would always want to be at the top. But I would say when
he's an Everton fan, he's used to being not quite at the top.
Well, you know, Leeds. I say no more. I think a league table. Well, you know, if you want us to be accountable, certainly I am accountable. I've got an election in 2 years' time, 2024. I'm going out back to the public to see if they believe that we've made a difference. But I would say what happens with the government structures is the government will give their ministers the money, they give the money to us, and then they put pressure on us to be accountable to them. But I would say surely it must be simpler for us to be accountable to the Treasury. So why have these ministers in the way who are maybe have their own peccadillos about what they want to see, or they're in and they're out? I mean, how many culture ministers have we had in the last 2 years? I mean, it's almost like a five-a-side. I think it's really important to have that direct chain of command. We could report directly back to Treasury, and you could put us under as much accountable scrutiny as you wish. But I think it's a bit clunky at the moment. And, you know, if you want the mayors to be accountable, then also government needs to be accountable for its promises. So when you promise to give us money, you've got to be accountable, you've got to deliver it. When you promise to give us schemes, then you have to also deliver those schemes as well. So it's two-way traffic.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm very keen to bring in some questions now. So I've got a few questions from online. Please do, people watching, feel free to submit more, or you can also upvote or vote for, in other words, questions that you like the look of, and then I'll come shortly to people in the room, so if you want to be prepared. I won't ask you a question on the final slide I had prepared, but just we may come back to this. Another aspect of the Levelling Up white paper is the commitment, we mentioned this a bit earlier on actually, to negotiate new devolution deals in lots of places that have missed out so far, including actually, as you said, North Yorkshire, East Riding of Yorkshire as well, and various parts of the East Midlands not too far from here. So we may really see the spread of this model, or some version of this model of government, to other parts of the North and Midlands in particular, which I think is quite a sensible ambition. Quite a long way probably to conclude all those deals, we'll see. We may come back to that. Okay, keen to put some of these questions to you. So first of all, a couple of related questions. One from someone called Brennan, who asks whether you would support the devolution of health to mayors, as is the case to Greater Manchester, where there's a big sort of devolved or semi-devolved, you might say, NHS and social care budget. So I'll ask you maybe a couple together with that one. So there's a related question, I suppose. What do you think your role is? This is an anonymous question. What do you think your role is in tackling health inequalities across West Yorkshire? And how will you work with the health system and voluntary sector to do that? And then finally, let me put you one other question, which is from someone called Gemma, who says, again, you've sort of alluded to this, rising costs of doing business, energy inflation, labour shortages mean that some businesses are struggling. There's been calls nationally for a delay to the national insurance increase, obviously due to come in next month. But what can you do as Mayor to support small businesses here in West Yorkshire? So there you go, 3 questions for you.
Great. Okay, so Brennan's question on health powers. Now, I think Andy is the only one with those devolved powers. We don't have them at the moment. I am, with the powers I have, currently delivering for what we have. But that doesn't mean to say that health is not in my line of fire, because, as I said earlier on, there is that Venn diagram that everything is interrelated, and you can't disassociate the health of your citizens from everything else that you're doing. And that's where my own levelling up comes in, because if you are a child born today in Ilkley, you will live 10 years longer of a healthier life than a child born today in Dewsbury. So, of course, health has got to be part of what we do. Now, when it comes to my role as Police and Crime Commissioner, we have a public health approach. So health is on that board of police and crime. So we are talking to our health partners. We are supporting health tech across the region. We have 4 out of the 5 NHS HQs here in West Yorkshire, NHS Digital being one. So we are working with those partners. And well-being is something that filters through absolutely everything. We know we're going to have a tsunami of poor mental health, aren't we? Given COVID and everything else that's coming down the track, and also cost of living crisis. So there are things I can do with soft power around health, but at the moment I'm not lobbying for those devolved powers over health. There are other things I would lobby for, but I'm also really pleased that we were able to agree that our inclusivity champion, which was something I was determined to deliver for the people of West Yorkshire, that would be a post that is co-funded and co-created by health in West Yorkshire. So the ICS, we're combining our resources for their senior role that will look at inequality and lack of inclusivity across the region in all of its many dimensions, because equality, diversity and inclusivity is part of my manifesto pledge, and that is where we see the poorest health, and COVID has shown us that, hasn't it? Our most diverse communities, our most disadvantaged communities have been impacted by COVID, by poverty, by the rising living crisis, cost of living crisis. So there's a lot of work to do there, but I'm not chomping at the bit for those powers as yet. I think I've answered potentially the role of the health inequalities. And businesses, well, I really am surprised that Rishi Sunak hasn't U-turned on the national insurance rise. He's getting so much heat from his own backbenchers on that. I think he's persevering, and it's going to go ahead. I think the way that they've dealt with the rising cost of fuel, I think, is tortuous. It's a loan, it's a credit card payment, and even if you haven't if you haven't had an energy bill, if you move into a new home with your partner or whatever, you will end up paying the bill for it regardless whether you actually took out the loan the year before. So it feels like a really convoluted treasury way to solve a problem, when it could be so easy. We could just have a windfall tax on those people who have earned the most because of this crisis. And I think, the windfall tax is exactly what it means, is just a one-off tax. So you've got that liquidity. And how am I helping business? Well, listening to business, they are telling me that it is incredibly tough at the moment. It's not just energy costs, it's also the cost of containers. So a container that from China that used to cost £2,000 is now £6,000, £10,000. And how do they pass on that cost to the consumer? So they are under pressure. There's also a recruitment squeeze because we've got great businesses in West Yorkshire. There is a real push to try and get good people into our region for businesses, and they are seeing people, particularly after Brexit, and in retail and hospitality, a real demand for staff that they can't fill those numbers. So there is a problem there. What we're doing is we have our growth managers that are embedded in our regions, in our local authorities to support businesses. We are making it simpler to come to us for support. During COVID, there was £5 million given out to our local authorities to support business directly, to make sure that we could keep those businesses alive. It's really important for me that we identify businesses where we can grow. So as I've said, health tech, fintech, the financial services, culture. We didn't have a culture committee before I became mayor, but there's massive amounts of jobs in that sector, in marketing, in advertising, in architecture, in museums and curating, and we've now seen film and TV and live performing come back. So we are supporting with grants, with training, with skills opportunities for workforce. We are open door for business to say, whatever your challenge, you can come to us because there is money available. We've put just to give you two examples, £6 million has been set aside for Skills Connect, which is, as I said, the boot camp programs, the 16 weeks, really agile response to skills need. So that's £6 million, but I've been able to say we need to make sure that SMEs are really identified and supported. We have an accelerator fund, £20 million, where you can come to us for funding for plants, for expansions and so on, and also finally for entrepreneurs, because we know that business also needs innovation. So that entrepreneur fund, the enterprise fund, £6 million for, it's a 3-streamed program. So if you've just got an idea, and is it a business, is it a thing, you could come to us and we could support you to identify how to set up a business and so on. And if just I could say finally, 50% of that scheme will go to women, 20% will go to Black, Asian, minority ethnic innovators, and 3% to those who identify as disabled. So as the mayor, I've been able to say, when it comes to disadvantage, when it comes to closing that social mobility gap, I have the levers that I can take action to make sure the money goes to the right people.
Yeah, really interesting set of things there. Okay, brilliant. Keen to bring in people from the room. So any questions in people's minds? I'll take again maybe 3 or so.
Yeah.
So there's a gentleman there and then a lady on the left there. If there's one more person, please let me know and I'll bring you in as well.
Thank you.
If you could just say who you are as well.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Right.
Yeah.
It's Josh Halliday from The Guardian newspaper.
Hi,
Hiya. I was interested in you saying that you're not chomping at the bit for health powers at the minute. Are there any powers that you are desperate for? And what's the government response to those requests been? And secondly, what did you make of the Levelling Up white paper, in particular the plans to devolve powers to different parts of the country, so that I think there's going to be an M22 eventually, or whatever, that's now an M10. Is it going to be an increasing number of mayors fighting for a ever smaller slice of the same pie?
Okay, do you want to just hold on and we'll bring in the other questions just in the interest of time. So yes, question over there.
Hello, Lauren Stevenson from the Department for Levelling Up, looking after deeper devolution strategy. I was actually going to ask a really similar question about powers. If you were in the running for another devolution deal, what would your top 3 powers be that you would like to see devolved?
Okay, very interesting. And there are, yeah, of course, Greater Manchester and West Midlands are in line for new trailblazer deals. So we'll see what comes out of those. But yeah, I mean, basically, if you were in that position, what would you look for? Is there any other question now? Or yeah,
those two go quite together.
Do you want to answer
are you all right
them
if I just?
Sure.
It might take just a moment to unpick that. I think there's a real commonality with what you're both saying. I think for me, what is really concerning me that I think we could have more power over is when it comes to tackling climate change. I'm able to say that 1/3 of the revenue of the gain share, £40 million is what we're going to give to our plan to tackle climate change, the climate emergency here in West Yorkshire. But I think when it comes to retrofitting homes, when it comes to more powers over what we can do as a region collectively, when it comes to flood defences and so on, I think that would be really useful. And I think actually coming together as a region would be good as well, that we could all share those powers for climate change, because we could help government get to their target of 2050. I also think around the skills agenda, because I think whilst we have adult education budget, we are sort of picking up where people have fallen through the cracks. And I think skills is actually one of the biggest levers to help levelling up. I mean, it's sort of two sides of the same coin, isn't it? Levelling up and skills. You empower people to get those great jobs, to learn out of poverty. So I think it's definitely those two are really important for me. I think also the powers over transport. I mean, I don't know how that would work, but to be able to actually work with partners, with Network Rail and the GB Rail, and to have that relationship with them that's really strategic, that our voice is heard about what we want to deliver, rather than having to go back to government and to keep making the case that we actually just need a half-decent transport system, I think would be really, really powerful. And I think in the Levelling Up White Paper, whilst I do think that I think the motivation was decent, and Michael Gove really does feel like he gets what levelling up means. And his 12 missions really did reflect my own 10 manifesto pledges, actually. There was a lot of commonality there. But there was nothing of substance. The only thing for us of substance was £22 million extra for brownfield fund housing. But sadly, it's in a shorter time frame to deliver, and with the same red tape and with the same restrictions. So it also came from his department. So it's sort of we say one thing, but we're doing the same old on the other hand. So I think in the white paper itself, there was a lot of good intentions. But for me, what is really important is Michael Gove is not a one-man band. This has to be about a whole government approach. Everybody, the Treasury in particular, the Treasury, housing, everybody has to understand that levelling up, it cannot be done by one person. But there are amazing powers I have already, and 10 months in, we're able to be delivering on those. But I think for me, it's definitely about skills and climate change. And I'm just going to say publicly that we were disappointed that we weren't a trailblazer, that we've got we've got innovation networks. We're part of the REAP program. Is that right, James? And I just think we have, our universities are changing science every day. And I think we are hoping to be considered for the second round of the Trailblazer programme.
Is that something that's being talked about?
Yeah, we've asked if we could be considered. But I think it just shows you they don't know who we are. They just don't know what we have to offer. If they weren't aware that actually our innovation and our universities and what we're achieving and the international impact that we're making wasn't reflected in that decision making. Because already we're part of it in a way, because in fact, I was at Huddersfield University only yesterday, and we're part of a programme that is working with Manchester. So we're already part of that family, and yet we weren't, we didn't get the accolade for it. So it's a real shame and a missed opportunity, actually.
Yeah, well, as part of this event series, as we were talking about before, we were in Liverpool last week. Steve Rotherham said something quite different. Why were we not chosen as well? So sounds like there's definitely going to be pressure from the other mayors, including you, for a second wave of deals, trailblazer deals. Okay, great. So we've got a few more minutes. So really keen to get more questions if we can. So we've got one person here, and then there's someone in the back row I can see on the left after that, Penny.
Hi, I'm Liam from UK 100. I just had a quick question. Obviously, the horrific Ukraine crisis has focused minds on energy independence at the moment. And I just wondered what kind of role you saw as, for yourself as mayor in delivering energy independence for the UK.
Okay. Should we take the second one?
Yeah.
As well? Yeah.
Hi, Chris Byrne here from the Yorkshire Post. You said you were very disappointed in the Leeds Bradford Airport decision last week. I was just wondering what, in your view, went wrong?
Okay, so yeah, I guess those two for now.
Yeah, well, energy independence. I am so pleased to be part of UK 100. I think there's two parts, I think, to that question. I think we have a role to play when it comes to supporting our citizens in this crisis. And you're absolutely right that Ukraine has really thrown it into sharp relief, hasn't it? But also the rising energy bills has also affected people on a day-to-day basis. I think we are in a moment in time where we can really powerfully make the case to tackle climate crisis, because it feels a bit esoteric for some people. Well, how does this impact on my life? What does it mean for me? I don't get it. And I think we can be making the case, as we have been doing in our retrofitting program, talking to people whose homes have been retrofitted and saying, what's the impact for you? And one of the impacts is lower energy bills, which is terrific. But also the woman I met who's a mum with kids and saying, actually it's helped the quality of my family life that my kids can now do their homework in their bedroom rather than the kitchen or fighting, because their bedrooms are warm and I can afford to heat their bedrooms so that we can have a better quality of family life. So I think we can make the case that with rising bills and with the insecurity about the pipeline of energy, and we don't want to be beholden to Russia, we have an opportunity to make the case that now is the time to be the boldest we can be when it comes to mitigations for the climate emergency. When it comes to energy independence, I think there is a real role for us to play when it comes to wind farms, when it comes to solar panels. And I know, for example, Leeds City Council are doing a really great scheme where they're putting solar panels on schools, and that energy is then going back to the grid, and the money is being spent on after-school clubs. These sorts of things that we can support the more national scheme, but of course it's a governmental decision, and that unfortunately the crisis wasn't prepared for, so we're slightly on the back foot, aren't we, around energy independence. But I think we can certainly lead the way when it comes to planning for wind farms, etc., that we want to be the greenest and the cleanest. So Chris, regarding the airport, I'm not in those rooms, I'm not part of those discussions, so I'm not sure what went wrong. But we all have to be reminded that actually this is a government decision about where the airports go. So it's not necessarily for us to decide where our airport is. So I wasn't party to that conversation, but you've heard my opinion going forward. So I'm really pleased that climate has been such a good bit of the questioning, because I think it's really important going forward.
Yeah, and it was notable that it wasn't actually integrated very clearly into the levelling up missions.
It wasn't mentioned
for
at all.
instance.
Hardly mentioned at all.
Yeah,
and I think that was a really missed trick, because actually, how can you level up when businesses are being washed away every 2 years? And what was once supposedly a once-in-a-lifetime catastrophe is now every 2 years. And people moving out of Hebden Bridge, a few years ago because they couldn't bear being washed away again. We don't want that, and that's why I'm so proud that we invested millions into flood defences in Mythenroyd, in Hebden Bridge. We are stepping up when it comes to tackling mitigations. We've got the brilliant flood mitigations in Leeds that are innovative, and I think they're the only one in the country that's as forward-looking. So I think it was a real, a missed chance, and it just shows that sometimes it's all words, isn't it? We want to tackle the climate emergency, but then talking about maybe bringing fracking back, and maybe there's going to be new oil wells dug in the North Sea. So we have to hold the government to account that we are, as our region and as mayors. I was really pleased to be invited to COP. To be on a couple of panels with mayors from across the world, and to be part of a network of mayors who are like the tugboats pushing national governments into the right place, because we can be more agile, we can be more reactive, and I think that's the place for the mayor, that we can really make those interventions on the ground that are quite powerful. Yeah.
Well, it's a fascinating subject. It's one we could no doubt do a whole event on, role of mayors in helping reach net zero targets. Maybe we'll come back and do an event with you some other time, Tracy. But yeah, we're basically at the end of time. I knew the hour was going to fly by. So thanks so much for taking part. It's been a pleasure. Thank you again to Manchester Airports Group in particular for their sponsorship. Final word I'm going to give again to Bronwyn Maddox, just to say farewell on behalf of the IFG.
Farewell sounds very final. But Akash, thank you very much indeed. And there's been a fascinating discussion, terrific questions. Thanks for sending them in. This last bit, both about the emphasis on climate change, has really stayed with me. The discussion we had just before that about the kind of powers that Tracy Brabin as mayor would like, not so much health, but very much climate and transport, that stayed with me. And her earlier comment about, look, we're accountable to the Treasury, why have ministers in the way? I thought that was very interesting. To be continued, as they say, and we're going to be in Newcastle next month. But thank you all very, very much for coming here today and for watching online. And of course, thank you to Akash Paun and Tracy Brabin. Thank you.